You're at 26,000 feet. The air is so thin, your brain is dying with every breath. Your fingertips went numb 3 hours ago. The wind screams past you at 100 miles per hour, tearing the moisture from your eyes, freezing your tears into ice before they can fall. You can see him up ahead, a body curled into the fetal position, face down in the snow. His jacket is bright green. You've seen his photo before. His name is on climbing forums. People call him Green Boots. He's been lying here for 27 years. You step over him. You have to. Because if you stop, if you kneel down, if you let yourself feel the weight of what you're looking at, you'll become one of them too. There are over 200 corpses on this mountain. Most of them are still up here, frozen, preserved. Some are sitting upright. Some are reaching toward the sky. Some have become landmarks. Directions given to climbers trying not to die the same way. Turn left at the body in the red coat. Keep going until you see the frozen couple. This is the death zone. And once you enter it, the mountain decides if you leave. This is that story. Everest doesn't forgive mistakes. It doesn't care about your training, your equipment, or how much money you paid to be here. Above 26,000 feet, what climbers call the death zone, your body begins to consume itself. Your cells are starving for oxygen. Your organs are shutting down. Your brain swells inside your skull. Every step feels like you're walking through wet concrete. And if you fall, if you collapse, if you sit down for just a moment to catch your breath, you don't get back up. The mountain keeps you. There are currently over 200 bodies scattered across Everest's upper reaches. Some are visible from the standard climbing routes. Others are hidden in crevasses or buried under fresh snow, only to reappear years later as the glaciers shift. Many of them are famous: Green Boots, Sleeping Beauty, Hannelore Schmatz, the German climber who died sitting upright, her eyes frozen open, her hair blowing in the wind for 17 years. These aren't just statistics. They're people who made one wrong decision, who pushed 5 minutes too far, who ignored the signs their body was giving them, and they're still there because retrieving a body from the death zone is nearly impossible. At that altitude, a rescue mission becomes a suicide mission. Helicopters can't fly that high. The air is too thin for the rotors to generate lift. Human beings can barely function. Every movement requires 3 times the energy it would at sea level. Carrying a frozen corpse, weighing over 200 pounds in full gear, down jagged ice cliffs, across crevasses, through waist-deep snow in sub-zero temperatures and hurricane-force winds, is beyond what most climbers can physically achieve. Several people have died trying to bring bodies down, so the dead stay where they fell, and over time they become part of the landscape. David Sharp died in 2006 in a small limestone cave near the summit known as Green Boots Cave, named for the body that had been there since 1996. Sharp was found by over 40 climbers on their way up. He was still alive. Barely. Suffering from severe frostbite, hypoxia, and hypothermia, he was semi-conscious, mumbling incoherently. Most climbers walked past him. Some stopped briefly, offered oxygen, then continued. No one attempted a rescue. Sharp died alone in that cave, sitting a few feet from Green Boots, the corpse he'd probably used as a landmark on his way up. The controversy that followed was brutal. Climbers defended their decision. At that altitude, they said, stopping to help someone means risking your own life. You're already operating at the edge of human survival. Your judgment is impaired. Your body is failing. If you use your oxygen trying to save someone who's already too far gone, you both die. It's a calculus most people will never have to make. But on Everest, it's routine. Francys Arsentiev understood this too late. In 1998, she became the first American woman to summit Everest without supplemental oxygen, a staggering achievement that requires superhuman endurance and acclimatization. But on the descent, she and her husband Sergei separated. Francys collapsed near the summit. She spent the night alone at 27,000 feet. exposed to winds that dropped the temperature to 40 degrees. The next day, climbers found her. She was still alive, frostbitten, delirious, barely able to speak. She begged them not to leave her. "I'm an American," she whispered, as if nationality could save her. They tried. A group of Uzbek climbers spent hours attempting to move her, but she couldn't walk, couldn't stand, couldn't hold on to a rope. They were running out of oxygen, running out of time. One by one, they made the decision to leave her. Francis died alone, her body sprawled across a rocky outcrop. For years afterward, climbers reported seeing her. Skin bleached white by the sun, hair whipping in the wind, her face frozen in an expression of terror. They called her Sleeping Beauty. Her husband, Sergei's body was found a year later, 1,000 feet below, tangled in ropes. He'd fallen trying to reach her. This is the psychological weight every climber carries on Everest. You walk past the dead, you step over them, you use them as waypoints, and you know that if something goes wrong, you'll become one of them. A landmark for the next wave of climbers. A cautionary tale shared in base camp. A body someone will photograph and post online with the caption, "This is why you don't underestimate the mountain." But people keep coming. Every year, hundreds of climbers pay upwards of $50,000 for a chance to summit. The routes are crowded now, so crowded that traffic jams form near the top, with climbers waiting in line at 29,000 feet, burning through oxygen, losing body heat, their fingers and toes freezing solid while they stand still. In 2019, 11 people died in a single season, many from exhaustion caused by overcrowding. Photos from that year show a conga line of climbers stretching up the Hillary Step, stepping over bodies, climbing past people actively dying, all of them desperate to reach the summit before their oxygen runs out. Because once you're in the death zone, the clock starts ticking, and it doesn't stop. And here's the thing that haunts every surviving climber. Most of the people who die on Everest aren't inexperienced. They're not reckless. They're accomplished mountaineers who made a single bad call, pushed a little too far, stayed a little too long, misjudged how much energy the descent would take. The margin for error is so thin that the difference between life and death is often 5 minutes. 5 minutes too slow, 5 minutes too tired, 5 minutes too proud to turn back. The mountain doesn't care, it keeps them all. His name was Tsewang Paljour. He was 28 years old, a member of the Indo-Tibetan Border Police, part of a 6-man Indian expedition attempting to summit Everest from the notoriously dangerous North Ridge, the Tibetan side of the mountain. On May 10, 1996, the same day 8 climbers died in the infamous disaster chronicled in Into Thin Air. Paljour and 2 teammates pushed for the summit despite worsening weather. They were last seen near the top, moving slowly, fighting against the wind. They never came back down. Paljour's body was discovered days later, tucked into a small limestone alcove at 27,890 feet, just below the first step on the northeast ridge. He was lying on his side, knees pulled to his chest, his face buried in his arms. He wore a bright green mountaineering boots, Koflak brand, unmistakable even from a distance. Those boots became his identity. For the next 23 years, climbers would pass him and whisper, "There's green boots." The cave where he died became a landmark, a waypoint, a psychological checkpoint. If you reached Green Boots Cave, you were close to the summit. But you were also in the most dangerous section of the climb. Guides would tell their clients, "When you see green boots, don't stop, don't think, just keep moving," because stopping meant looking, and looking meant confronting the reality that the body lying 3 feet from you was once a person with a family, dreams, a life he thought he'd return to. Paljour's mother, Tashi Angmo, gave interviews for years afterward, begging someone, anyone, to bring her son home. "He's not a landmark," she said. "He's my child." But no one could. The cost was too high, the risk too great. Everest had claimed him, and Everest doesn't let go. Then in 2014, a team of Sherpas attempted something unprecedented. They tried to move Green Boots. It took 6 men 3 hours to shift his body just a few feet. His clothing had frozen to the rock. His limbs were locked in rigor mortis. The temperature was 30 degrees. The wind was relentless. They managed to drag him a short distance off the main trail, tucking him behind a boulder where he'd be less visible. But they couldn't bring him down. So they left him there, partially hidden, still frozen, still waiting. But here's the part that keeps you awake at night. Green Boots wasn't the only one in that cave. In 2006, when David Sharp was found dying, he was sitting next to Green Boots. Some climbers who passed him thought he was Green Boots, just another corpse marking the route. Sharp was conscious for at least some of that time, which means he knew he was dying next to a body that had been there for 10 years. He knew that he was about to become the same thing. A frozen warning ignored by everyone who passed. Over 40 climbers walked by David Sharp that day. Most didn't realize he was alive. A few stopped, offered oxygen, checked for signs of life. One climber, Max Chaya, spent time with him, tried to get him to move, but Sharp was hypothermic and hypoxic. His brain wasn't functioning. He couldn't help himself. Chaya, already exhausted and low on oxygen, had to make a choice: die trying to save someone who was likely beyond saving, or continue down and survive. He chose survival. They all did. Sharp died within hours. His body remained in that cave for years, sitting upright, arms wrapped around his knees, face visible beneath his frozen balaclava. Climbers posted photos online, debated ethics in forums, argued about responsibility. Some said leaving him was murder. Others said trying to save him would have been suicide. The truth is, there's no good answer. Not at 28,000 feet. Not when your brain is starving for oxygen and your body is shutting down. And this is what Everest does to people. It forces you to walk past someone begging for help because helping them means you'll die too. The psychological damage this causes is profound. Climbers who summited in 1996, during the disaster that killed 8 people, still suffer from PTSD decades later. They have nightmares about the people they left behind. They hear voices in the wind. They see faces in the snow. Some never climb again. Others become obsessed, returning to Everest year after year, as if summiting again will erase the guilt of surviving when others didn't. Beck Weathers, who was left for dead during the 1996 disaster and somehow survived, said this in an interview: "I didn't die on Everest, but I'm not sure the person who came down was the same person who went up." Green Boots became a symbol of that transformation, a reminder that the mountain strips you down to your most basic instinct: survive. Everything else, morality, compassion, honor, falls away when you're dying, and everyone in the death zone is dying. Slowly, incrementally. Your body is consuming itself, your brain is swelling, your blood is thickening. You're not thinking clearly. You're not making rational decisions. You're just trying to take the next step. And when you see Green Boots, when you pass his body curled in that cave, you're forced to ask yourself a question most people will never face. Would you stop to help? Or would you step over him and keep climbing? Because on Everest, stopping to be a hero often means becoming another body for the next climber to step over. And the mountain is covered with heroes who made that choice. Francys Arsentiev was 40 years old when she decided to climb Everest without supplemental oxygen. It was 1998. She was an experienced mountaineer, a mother of 2, and fiercely determined to become the first American woman to summit the world's highest peak without bottled oxygen, a feat only a handful of people had achieved. Climbing without oxygen is exponentially more dangerous. Your body can't function properly. Your brain begins to die. Every decision you make is impaired. But for elite climbers, it's the ultimate test. Proof that you're not just physically strong, but mentally invincible. Francys and her husband Sergei Arsentiev, a Russian climber, set out together. They summited on May 22, 1998. Francys achieved her goal. She stood on top of the world, gasping in the thin air, her body already beginning to fail. But summiting is only halfway. The descent is where most people die. Somewhere on the way down, Francys and Sergei became separated. The exact sequence of events is unclear. Some reports say they got disoriented in the dark. Others suggest Sergei descended ahead, assuming Francys was behind him. What is known is this: Francys collapsed near the summit, alone, at approximately 27,200 feet. She spent the night there, exposed, in temperatures that dropped below 40 degrees, with no tent, no sleeping bag, no oxygen, just her body, shutting down, one system at a time. She should have died that night, but when the sun rose on May 23rd, Francys Arsentiev was still alive. The first climbers to find her were members of an Uzbek expedition. They were on their way to the summit when they saw her, lying on her back on a steep, rocky slope. Arms spread wide, her jacket torn open, her skin bleached white from frostbite and sun exposure. She was barely conscious. Her words were slurred. She kept repeating the same phrase, "Don't leave me." They tried. They spent hours attempting to move her, but Francys couldn't walk, couldn't stand. Her legs were frozen, her hands were useless. Every time they tried to lift her, she screamed. The pain was unbearable. They rigged ropes, tried to drag her, but the terrain was too steep, too icy, and they were running out of oxygen, running out of time. The wind was picking up. A storm was coming. If they stayed much longer, they'd die with her. One by one, the Uzbek climbers made the decision to leave. They descended, telling themselves they'd send help, that someone stronger, more equipped, would come back for her. But at that altitude, rescue is almost impossible. No helicopter can fly that high. No rescue team can reach you in time. The climbers knew this, and Francys knew it too. Later that day, two more climbers, Ian Woodall and Cathy O'Dowd, members of a South African expedition, found Francys. She was still alive, still conscious, but barely. Her eyes were open, unfocused. She was making sounds, low, guttural moans. She couldn't form words anymore. Woodall later described the scene. She was beyond saving. She was already dead. Her body just didn't know it yet. They stayed with her for an hour, talked to her, held her hand. Woodall took off his jacket and draped it over her, even though he knew it wouldn't save her. He just didn't want her to die alone. They radioed base camp, explained the situation. The response was clear: leave her. If you stay, you'll die too. Woodall and O'Dowd descended. They left Francys Arsentiev lying on the mountain, still alive, her eyes tracking them as they walked away. She died sometime that night, alone, frozen, sprawled across the rocks. For the next 9 years, Francys remained exactly where she died. Her body became another landmark. Climbers called her Sleeping Beauty because from a distance, with the sun hitting her face, she looked peaceful, like she was just resting. But up close, the reality was horrific. Her skin was stretched tight across her skull. Her mouth was frozen open. Her eyes were hollow, sunken, staring at nothing. Climbers reported nightmares after passing her. Some refused to look, others couldn't look away. Ian Woodall was haunted by the decision to leave her. In interviews, he described the guilt as suffocating, a weight that never lifted. In 2007, nearly a decade after Francys died, Woodall returned to Everest with a single goal: bring her body down, or at least move her out of sight, so climbers wouldn't have to pass her anymore. It took a team of Sherpas and climbers over 4 hours to move Francys's body just 1,000 feet. They wrapped her in an American flag, said prayers, and pushed her off a steep ledge into a crevasse where she'd be hidden from view. It wasn't a burial. It was concealment, but it was the best they could do. Woodall later said, I didn't do it for her. She's gone. I did it for us, for the people who had to keep walking past her. But Francys's story didn't end there. Her husband Sergei's body was found a year after her death in 1999, about 1,000 feet below where Francys died. He was tangled in climbing ropes, his body broken from a fall. The evidence suggests he turned back to find her. That after summiting, after descending, after realizing she wasn't behind him, Sergei climbed back up into the death zone to search for his wife. He likely found her, maybe even tried to help her. But at that altitude, exhausted, oxygen-deprived, he slipped, fell, died trying to save her. Their 2 sons were teenagers when they lost both parents to Everest. This is the cruelty of the mountain. It doesn't just kill climbers. It destroys families. It leaves behind children who grow up wondering if their parents' ambition was worth more than coming home. It creates widows and widowers who spend the rest of their lives staring at photos, wondering if they could have done something, said something, to stop them from going. And it leaves bodies behind that force, every future climber to confront an unbearable question. If that were your wife, your husband, your friend lying there begging you not to leave, would you stay and die with them? Or would you walk away and live with the guilt? Francys Arsentiev never got a choice. But everyone who passed her did. And that's the weight they carry forever. On May 22, 2019, a photograph went viral. It showed a conga line of climbers stretching up the southeast ridge of Mount Everest, snaking toward the summit in a single-file queue that looked more like a Black Friday sale than a mountaineering expedition. Over 200 people were on the mountain that day, and they were stuck, waiting at 29,000 feet in the death zone. The bottleneck was near the Hillary Step, a near vertical rock face just below the summit. Only one person could climb it at a time, so climbers waited in line, standing still, burning through their oxygen, their body heat leaching into the sub-zero air, their fingers and toes freezing solid while they clutched their ice axes and tried not to think about the fact that every minute they stood still was a minute closer to death. 11 people died during the 2019 climbing season. Most of them didn't die from falls. They didn't die from avalanches. They died from waiting. This is what happens when Everest becomes commercialized. When climbing the world's tallest mountain stops being an extreme athletic achievement and becomes a bucket list tourist experience. In 2019, the Nepali government issued a record 381 climbing permits, each costing $11,000. Add in the cost of guides, Sherpas, equipment, travel, and the total price for summiting Everest is around $50,000 to $100,000. That price tag attracts 2 types of people: experienced mountaineers who've trained for years, and wealthy amateurs who think money can buy survival. It can't. Ravi Kumar, a 27-year-old police officer from India, collapsed just 150 meters from the summit. He'd been waiting in the queue for hours. His oxygen had run out. He was hypothermic, hypoxic, and exhausted. His teammates tried to help him descend, but he couldn't move. His legs had given out. He died on the mountain, his summit attempt unfinished, his body left behind because carrying him down would have killed everyone trying to help. Anjali Kulkarni, a 55-year-old climber from Mumbai, summited successfully, but on the descent, she ran out of oxygen. The delays had eaten through her supply. She collapsed near the balcony, a flat section of the route at 27,500 feet. Her husband and guide tried to revive her. They radioed for help, but help doesn't exist at that altitude. Anjali died within hours. Her husband descended alone, leaving her body on the mountain. Donald Lynn Cash, an American climber, died on the descent after summiting. He'd waited hours in the queue. By the time he reached the top, he was already dangerously fatigued. On the way down, he collapsed. His guide tried to keep him moving, but Cash was incoherent, stumbling, unable to control his limbs. He died at Camp 4, just hours from safety. These weren't inexperienced climbers. They weren't reckless. They were people who had trained, prepared, followed the rules, but the mountain doesn't care about preparation. And when you add overcrowding to extreme altitude, the margin for error vanishes completely. Here's what most people don't understand. Standing still at 29,000 feet is a death sentence. Your body is designed to keep moving at that altitude. Every step generates heat. Every movement circulates blood. But when you stop, when you stand in a queue, shivering, waiting for your turn to climb, you're freezing from the inside out. Your core temperature drops, your blood thickens, your brain swells, and you're using oxygen even when you're not moving. So climbers in the 2019 queue faced an impossible choice. Use their oxygen while waiting and risk running out before they summit, or conserve oxygen and risk dying from hypothermia while standing still. Several climbers reported seeing people collapse in the queue and being dragged to the side of the trail so others could pass. One climber, Hannelore Schmatz, a Nepali mountaineer attempting to summit all 14 8,000-meter peaks in 7 months, posted a photo on Instagram showing the traffic jam. He captioned it, "I was stuck in the death zone for hours. People are dying. This is not mountaineering. This is a disaster." And it was. But it's a disaster that keeps happening. Because Everest is profitable. For Nepal, climbing permits generate millions of dollars annually, critical revenue for one of the poorest countries in the world. For expedition companies, guiding clients to the summit is a lucrative business. And for climbers, summiting Everest is a status symbol, a story to tell, a photo to post, proof that you conquered the world's highest peak. The problem is, the mountain isn't designed for 200 people to summit in a single day. The routes are narrow, the weather windows are short, and the infrastructure, fixed ropes, ladders, Sherpa support, is stretched beyond capacity. Sherpas, the unsung heroes of Everest, bear the brunt of this overcrowding. They're the ones fixing ropes in the death zone, carrying oxygen bottles, rescuing exhausted climbers, retrieving bodies, and they're dying at an alarming rate. Between 2004 and 2019, over 100 Sherpas died on Everest, nearly 1/3 of all deaths on the mountain. They're paid a fraction of what Western climbers pay for permits. They risk their lives so tourists can take a selfie at the summit. And when something goes wrong, they're the ones expected to fix it. Gelje Sherpa, a 30-year-old guide, became famous in 2023 for saving a Malaysian climber who'd collapsed at 27,700 feet. Gelje carried the man on his back for 6 hours, down icy slopes, across crevasses, through the death zone. He gave up his own summit attempt to save someone he'd never met. When asked why, Gelje said, "Because it was the right thing to do, even if it cost me everything." But not everyone makes that choice, and the 2019 season proved it. Climbers stepped over dying people to reach the summit. Guides radioed base camp to report deaths, then continued upward with their clients. Photos from the summit show smiling climbers posing for selfies while, just below them, bodies lay in the snow, uncovered, ignored. This is what Everest has become, a mountain where human life is secondary to achievement, where paying $100,000 doesn't guarantee survival, it just guarantees you a spot in the queue, and if you die waiting, you become another landmark for the next wave of climbers to step over, because on Everest, the summit matters more than anything, even life itself. Lincoln Hall was 49 years old when he summited Everest on May 25, 2006. He'd been climbing for over 20 hours. He was exhausted, hypoxic, barely conscious. On the descent, near the balcony at 27,500 feet, his brain began to swell. Cerebral edema, a lethal condition where fluid accumulates in the brain, causing confusion, hallucinations, and eventual death. Hall's team tried to get him down, but he couldn't walk, couldn't follow directions. He was incoherent, rambling, stumbling in circles. His Sherpas made the decision. Hall was going to die. There was nothing they could do. They radioed base camp, reported his death, and descended without him. Hall's family was notified. Obituaries were prepared. The mountaineering community mourned. Lincoln Hall was dead, except he wasn't. The next morning, American climber Dan Mazur and his team were ascending the same route when they found Hall, sitting upright on a narrow ledge, his jacket open, his gloves off, his nose and cheeks black with frostbite. He was alive, and he was talking. "I imagine you're surprised to see me here," Hall said calmly, as if he were sitting in a cafe and not perched on the edge of a cliff at 28,000 feet. Mazur faced an impossible decision. He was hours from the summit. His team had spent months preparing, tens of thousands of dollars. This was their shot. But if they stopped to help Hall, they'd have to abandon their summit attempt, use their oxygen to save him, risk their own lives descending with a dying man who might not survive anyway. Mazur chose Hall. For 4 hours, Mazur's team stayed with Hall, gave him oxygen, wrapped him in their jackets, radioed for help. Eventually, Sherpas arrived with fresh oxygen and medicine. Hall was carried down. He survived, lost fingers and toes to frostbite, but lived. Mazur never reached the summit. He went home with no photo, no achievement, no glory. Just the knowledge that he'd saved a man's life. When asked if he regretted it, Mazur said, "How could I? He's alive because we stopped. That's the only thing that matters." But Mazur's decision is the exception, not the rule. For every climber saved on Everest, a dozen are left behind, and the justifications for leaving them are disturbingly consistent. They were already too far gone. This is the most common rationalization. If a climber is unconscious, incoherent, or unable to move, rescuers assume they're beyond saving. But Lincoln Hall was incoherent. David Sharp was incoherent. Francys Arsentiev was incoherent. Deciding who's too far gone in the death zone, where your own brain is oxygen-starved and your judgment is impaired, is nearly impossible. Stopping to help would have killed me too. This is true. At extreme altitude, every action has a cost. Sharing oxygen means you run out faster. Spending extra time in the death zone increases your own risk of edema, frostbite, exhaustion. But it's also true that people have been saved. Hall, Beck Weathers, Gelje Sherpa's rescue of the Malaysian climber. Survival is possible. It just requires sacrifice. It's what mountaineers sign up for. This argument suggests that climbers accept the risk of being abandoned when they choose to climb Everest. That there's an unspoken understanding. Above 8,000 meters, you're on your own. But does signing a waiver to climb absolve everyone else of moral responsibility? If you saw someone dying on a city street, you'd call 911. You'd stop. You wouldn't walk past because they chose to be in a dangerous neighborhood. The truth is, Everest reveals something uncomfortable about human nature. When survival is on the line, most people choose themselves. Dr. Kenneth Kamler, a physician who's treated climbers on Everest, described it this way. At that altitude, your brain is dying. You're not thinking clearly. Your moral compass shuts down. The only thing that matters is your next breath. And if helping someone means you don't get that next breath, your brain tells you to walk away. It's not cruelty. It's biology. But biology doesn't explain everything. In 2012, climbers passed Shreya Shah, a 33-year-old Canadian woman who collapsed 300 meters from the summit. She was alive, conscious. Her Sherpa guide stayed with her, trying to get her to move, but she was too weak. Other climbers stopped briefly, took photos, then continued upward. Shah died within hours. Her Sherpa survived. He later said, "I begged people to help. They said they couldn't. They had to reach the summit." This is the part that haunts people. It's not that climbers couldn't help. It's that they chose not to, because helping meant sacrificing their summit, their goal, their achievement. And in that moment, standing at 28,000 feet, the summit mattered more than a stranger's life. There's a philosophical concept called the trolley problem. If a runaway trolley is about to kill 5 people, but you can pull a lever to divert it onto a track where it will kill only 1 person, do you pull the lever? Most people say yes, but on Everest, the equation is different. It's not sacrifice 1 to save 5. It's sacrifice yourself to maybe save 1. And most people can't do it. Even Lincoln Hall, after being saved, said, "I don't blame anyone who walked past me. If I'd been in their position, I might have done the same thing." But some climbers can't live with that choice. Ed Viestas, one of the most accomplished mountaineers in history, has a rule. Getting to the summit is optional. Getting down is mandatory. He's turned back from summits more times than he's reached them. Not because he was in danger, but because someone else was. He believes that mountaineering isn't about conquering peaks. It's about making the right decision when everything is on the line. But Viestas is rare. And on Everest, where over 200 bodies mark the routes, where climbers queue in the death zone like they're waiting for a theme park ride, where summiting is a status symbol worth more than life itself, making the right decision is becoming rarer every year, and the mountain keeps adding landmarks. Hannelore Schmatz was the first woman and first German to die on Everest, but that's not why climbers remember her. They remember her because for 17 years her body sat upright on the southeast ridge, perfectly preserved, her eyes open, staring down at the route, her hair frozen in the wind, and every climber who passed her had to look into those eyes. It was October 2nd, 1979. Hannelore and her husband Gerhard were part of a German expedition attempting a late-season summit. Late-season climbs are notoriously dangerous. The weather is unstable. The temperatures are colder. The jet stream descends lower, bringing winds that can exceed 150 mph. Most expeditions wrap up by early September, but Hannelore was determined. She'd turned back from a previous attempt. This time, she wouldn't fail. She summited on October 2nd, becoming the 4th woman ever to stand on top of Everest. But the descent was slow, too slow. By the time she and her Sherpa guide, Ray Janet, reached the south summit, just 300 meters below the top, darkness had fallen. They were exhausted, hypothermic, out of oxygen. Janet couldn't go any farther. He sat down in the snow and told Hannelore to keep going. She refused. "We stay together," she said. They died together. When the sun rose the next morning, Hannelore's teammates found her sitting upright, leaning against her pack, her arms wrapped around her knees. She looked like she was resting, but she was frozen solid. Janet's body was found nearby, partially buried in snow. The team debated bringing them down, but at that altitude, moving a body is nearly impossible, so they left them, and Hannelore stayed. For years, climbers reported seeing her from a distance, a small figure sitting on the ridge, unmoving, impossibly still. Some thought she was a rock formation. Others thought she was another climber taking a break. But as they got closer, the truth became clear. She was a corpse, perfectly preserved by the sub-zero temperatures and lack of decomposition at that altitude. Her skin was bleached white by the sun. Her face was frozen in a neutral expression, not peaceful, not anguished, just empty. Her eyes were open, staring straight ahead, and climbers had to pass her, had to walk within a few feet of her, had to see her face. The psychological impact was devastating. Climbers reported nightmares. Some refused to look, turning their heads as they walked past. Others couldn't look away. They described the sensation as haunting, like she was watching them, judging them. One climber said, "I wanted to close her eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to touch her." Hannelore's husband, Gerhard, who was part of the expedition but hadn't summited that day, was shattered by her death. He returned to Everest twice, attempting to bring her body down. Both times, the conditions were too harsh, the risk too great. He died in 1984 in an avalanche on Everest, still trying to reach his wife. For 17 years, Hannelore Schmatz remained on the mountain until 1996, when high winds reportedly blew her body off the ridge. Some reports say her remains were buried by avalanche debris. Others claim her body was intentionally moved by Sherpas. No one knows for sure. What's certain is that she's no longer visible from the route. But the psychological scar she left on climbers who passed her remains. This is the thing about bodies on Everest. They're not just landmarks, they're mirrors. When you see a corpse sitting upright, frozen in place, you're forced to imagine yourself in that position, sitting down because you're too tired to take another step, closing your eyes for just a moment, and never opening them again. You see your own death staring back at you, and it changes how you climb. Some climbers become more cautious. They turn back sooner. They listen to their bodies. But others become reckless. They push harder, faster, desperate to summit and descend before they become another body on the route. And that desperation, that refusal to accept limits, is what kills people. Hannelore Schmatz made a single mistake. She summited too late. If she'd turned back an hour earlier, she would have survived. But she was so close, and when you're that close, turning back feels impossible. Every climber who's summited Everest describes the same internal battle. Your body is screaming at you to stop, but your mind is screaming louder. Just a little farther, just a few more steps. You've come too far to quit now. And then you sit down, just for a moment, to catch your breath, and you never stand up again. This is the cruelty of the death zone. It doesn't kill you violently. There's no sudden fall, no dramatic accident. You just get tired. So tired, and sitting down feels like relief. Your body stops shivering. The pain fades. You feel warm, paradoxically warm, a symptom of severe hypothermia where your brain malfunctions and convinces you you're overheating. Climbers in the final stages of hypothermia often remove their jackets, their gloves. They're found half naked, frozen solid, because their brains told them they were burning up. Hannelore Schmatz was wearing all her gear when she died, which means she stayed conscious long enough to know what was happening, long enough to understand that help wasn't coming, long enough to feel her body shutting down, one system at a time, and for 17 years she sat there, a warning, a monument, a reminder that Everest doesn't care how determined you are. The mountain takes who it wants, and sometimes it displays them for everyone to see, so the next climber knows exactly what they're risking. Beck Weathers should not have survived. According to every medical expert who examined him afterward, his survival defies biological possibility. He was left for dead. Twice. His body temperature dropped so low he should have died from hypothermia. His hands and face were so severely frostbitten that climbers who found him didn't recognize him as human. And yet, he walked off the mountain. It was May 10th, 1996. The deadliest day in Everest history up to that point. 8 people died in a single storm. Beck Weathers was supposed to be one of them. Weathers was a pathologist from Dallas, Texas, an amateur climber who'd paid $65,000 to join Rob Hall's guided expedition. He had radial keratotomy surgery years earlier, a procedure that corrected his vision but left him vulnerable to high-altitude complications. At extreme altitude, the low atmospheric pressure causes the cornea to swell, distorting vision. By the time Weathers reached the South Col at 26,000 feet, he was nearly blind. Rob Hall, his guide, made a decision. Weathers would wait at the South Col while the rest of the team continued to the summit. If his vision improved, he could join a later group. If not, he'd descend, Weathers agreed. He sat down to wait, but his vision didn't improve, and while he was waiting, a massive storm rolled in, winds exceeding 100 mph, whiteout conditions, temperatures dropping to 40 degrees. Climbers who'd summited earlier that day were now lost, scattered across the mountain, stumbling through the storm, unable to see more than a few feet ahead. Weathers tried to descend, but he was blind, disoriented, hypothermic. He collapsed near the south col, his body shutting down. A group of climbers found him and tried to help, but they were dying too. They huddled together. Weathers, Yasuko Namba, a Japanese climber who'd summited that day, and several others, hoping the storm would pass. It didn't. By morning, Weathers was unresponsive. His face was frozen, his hands were frozen solid, black, swollen, useless. His skin was grey, he had no pulse. Rescue teams examined him and made the call. Beck Weathers was dead. They radioed base camp. His wife was notified. His children were told their father was gone. But Weathers was still alive, barely, in a state of profound hypothermia so severe that his metabolic functions had slowed to near zero. His body had entered a kind of suspended animation, a last-ditch survival mechanism where the heart beats so faintly it's undetectable. Hours later, Weathers regained consciousness. He opened his eyes, looked around, saw Yasuko Namba lying next to him, frozen to death, saw the other climbers gone. He was alone, abandoned, left for dead, and he stood up. Weathers later described the moment. "I don't know how, I don't know why, but I stood up, and I started walking." He couldn't see. His hands were frozen into claws. His face was a mask of black frostbite. He was hypothermic, hypoxic and disoriented. But he walked, stumbled, fell, got up, kept moving. And somehow, impossibly, he found his way back to Camp 4. When climbers at Camp 4 saw him, they thought he was a hallucination, a ghost. His face was unrecognizable. His hands looked like blackened stumps. He was swaying, barely conscious, muttering incoherently. But he was alive. The problem was, no one knew what to do with him. At that altitude, there are no doctors, no medical equipment, no way to treat severe frostbite or hypothermia, and the storm was still raging. Descending with Weathers in that condition was impossible, so they put him in a tent, gave him oxygen, and hoped he'd survive until the weather cleared. He did, barely. The next morning, a daring helicopter rescue, the highest altitude evacuation ever attempted at the time, airlifted Weathers off the mountain. He was flown to a hospital in Kathmandu, where doctors assessed the damage, both hands destroyed. He lost his right hand entirely. His left hand lost all its fingers. His nose was gone, amputated due to frostbite. His face required extensive reconstructive surgery. He was blind in one eye, but he was alive. Weathers' survival is medically inexplicable. Dr. Kenneth Kamler, who treated him, said, "By every measure, he should have died." His body temperature was so low we couldn't register it on a standard thermometer. His blood was so thick it shouldn't have been able to circulate. And yet, his body found a way to keep functioning. The psychological aftermath was brutal. Weathers suffered from severe PTSD. He had nightmares, flashbacks, survivor's guilt. He'd been left for dead twice, abandoned by people who thought he was too far gone, and while he understood the logic, stopping to help him would have killed his rescuers, the emotional weight of being left behind was crushing. He wrote a memoir, Left for Dead, where he described the loneliness of waking up in the snow, realizing everyone was gone, and understanding that he was going to die alone. "That's the part that haunts me," he wrote. "Not the cold, not the pain, but the loneliness, the knowledge that I'd been written off." Weathers never climbed again, but he became an advocate for high-altitude safety, for realistic expectations on Everest, for the idea that summiting is never worth dying for. He gave speeches where he'd hold up his prosthetic hand and say, "This is what Everest cost me, and I'm one of the lucky ones." Because Beck Weathers survived against all odds, against biology, against logic. But most people don't. And the climbers who walked past his frozen body that morning, who checked for a pulse and found nothing, who made the agonizing decision to leave him behind, they carry that guilt forever, even though they were right to leave, even though staying would have killed them, even though Weathers himself doesn't blame them, because on Everest, making the right decision doesn't make it easier to live with. And sometimes, the people you leave for dead come back to remind you that you walked away. Over 300 people have died on Mount Everest since the first recorded fatality in 1922. Two-thirds of those bodies are still on the mountain. Some are visible from the climbing routes, others are buried under glaciers, slowly moving downward, frozen in time, waiting to reappear decades later. And a few have become so iconic, so embedded in the culture of Everest, that climbers still navigate by them. Turn left at Green Boots. Keep going until you see Sleeping Beauty. If you reach Hannelore, you've gone too far. These aren't trail markers. They're people, fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, and they're still there because the mountain won't let them go. Retrieving a body from the death zone costs upwards of $70,000. It requires a team of Sherpas willing to risk their lives, favorable weather, and extraordinary physical effort. Most families can't afford it, and even when they can, the risk is often deemed too great. Several Sherpas have died attempting body recoveries. In 2017, a team trying to bring down the body of a Slovak climber was caught in an avalanche. 2 Sherpas died. The body remained on the mountain, so the dead accumulate year after year, and climbers adapt. They stop seeing the bodies as people and start seeing them as landmarks, obstacles, things to step over on the way to the summit. It's a psychological defense mechanism, a way to avoid confronting the horror of what you're seeing. Because if you let yourself think about it, if you let yourself imagine their final moments, you can't keep climbing. But some climbers can't shut it off. In 2019, Tsewang Paljour, during his record-breaking attempt to summit all 14 8,000-meter peaks in 6 months, stopped his own climb to help rescue a dying climber. He gave up his oxygen, used his own supplies, spent hours stabilizing the man. He later posted on Instagram, "The summit can wait, a life can't." Paljour's decision was celebrated, but it was also controversial, because it implied that other climbers, those who walk past the dying, are morally wrong. And that's a debate the mountaineering community can't agree on. David Sharp, Francys Arsentiev, Shreya Shah, all of them were passed by multiple climbers who could have stopped, who could have tried, but didn't. Were they wrong, or were they survivors? Is there a moral difference between walking past someone who's dying and actively letting them die? Philosophers call this the sin of omission, the idea that failing to act is morally equivalent to causing harm. If you see someone drowning and you don't throw them a life preserver, are you responsible for their death? Most people would say yes. But on Everest, where stopping to help means risking your own life, the equation changes. And this is what makes Everest different from any other environment on Earth. It strips away the social contract. In civilization, we expect help, we expect rescue. We expect that if we're in danger, someone will call 911, perform CPR, drag us out of a burning building. But on Everest, above 8,000 meters, those expectations don't exist. You're on your own, and everyone around you is on their own. Survival is individual, and if you die, you become part of the landscape. But here's the thing, that's not entirely true, because people do get saved. Lincoln Hall, Beck Weathers, the Malaysian climber carried down by Gelje Sherpa. Survival is possible. Rescue is possible. It just requires someone willing to sacrifice their summit, their goal, their achievement, and most people aren't willing to do that. In 2012, German climber Shreya Shah died 300 meters from the summit. She'd summited successfully, taken photos, celebrated, but on the descent, she collapsed. Her Sherpa stayed with her. Other climbers stopped, checked on her, then continued down. One climber later said, "I wanted to help, but I didn't have the strength, and I didn't want to die trying." That climber isn't a villain. He made a rational decision, but Shreya's family called him a coward. Her mother said, "You walked past my daughter while she was dying. How do you live with that?" The climber later gave an interview. He was in tears. "I think about her every day," he said. "I think about whether I could have done more, whether I should have stayed, and I don't know. I don't know if saving her was possible, but I know I didn't try, and I'll carry that forever." This is the psychological toll of Everest. It's not just the climbers who die, it's the ones who survive and have to live with the choices they made, the people they walked past, the cries for help they ignored, the bodies they used as landmarks. And every year, more people come, more permits are issued, more climbers queue in the death zone, more bodies accumulate, and the mountain becomes more crowded, more commercial, more deadly. In 2023, Nepal issued over 450 climbing permits. 17 people died, most from exhaustion, overcrowding, or waiting too long in the death zone. And yet, the demand keeps growing, because summiting Everest is no longer about mountaineering. It's about status, about Instagram photos, about proving you did something extraordinary. But the mountain doesn't care why you're there. It only cares that you survive, and if you don't, it keeps you. There's a term climbers use, the Rainbow Valley. It's a section of the northeast ridge littered with so many brightly colored corpses, red jackets, yellow suits, green boots, that from a distance it looks like a valley of flowers, except the flowers are bodies. And they've been there for decades. This is what Everest has become. A graveyard. A museum of hubris, a place where the line between achievement and death is measured in minutes, and every climber who steps onto that mountain knows, if something goes wrong, if you sit down for just a moment, if you push 5 minutes too far, you'll become the next landmark someone uses to find their way to the summit. Mount Everest is not a mountain. It's a cemetery, a frozen archive of human ambition, arrogance, and desperation. Over 300 people have died there. 2/3 of them are still on the mountain. Their bodies mark the routes, their stories haunt the survivors, and yet, every year, hundreds more climbers come, drawn by the same promise that killed everyone who came before: the summit. For those who survive, the psychological damage is profound. Many never climb again. Some develop PTSD, haunted by the faces of the people they walked past. Others become obsessed, returning to Everest year after year, as if summiting again will erase the guilt of surviving when others didn't. Beck Weathers, who was left for dead twice and lost both hands to frostbite, never climbed again. He wrote a memoir, gave speeches, and spent the rest of his life reminding people that the summit is never worth dying for. But not everyone learns that lesson. In 2023, Kami Rita Sherpa summited Everest for the 28th time. He's a Sherpa, world record, part of the ethnic group native to the Himalayas, who serve as guides, porters, and rescuers for Western climbers. Sherpas are the backbone of Everest expeditions. They fix the ropes, carry the oxygen, rescue the dying, and they die at a rate far higher than Western climbers. But they don't climb for glory, they climb for survival. Because in Nepal, one of the poorest countries in the world, working on Everest is one of the only ways to make a living wage. This is the uncomfortable truth about Everest. It's a business, a lucrative industry built on the backs of Sherpas, funded by wealthy Westerners, and sustained by a government that depends on climbing permits for revenue. The mountain doesn't care, but the people who profit from it do, and every year the ethics get murkier. The lines get blurrier. The bodies accumulate. David Sharp's mother gave an interview after her son died. She said, "He wasn't left to die, he was ignored. There's a difference." She's right. Because leaving someone to die implies you tried. You made an effort. You exhausted every option. But ignoring them means you saw them suffering and chose to walk past. And on Everest, that happens every season. Ian Woodall, who left Francys Arsentiev on the mountain in 1998 and returned 9 years later to move her body, said, "I didn't do it for her. I did it for the climbers who had to keep walking past her because seeing her destroyed people, and I couldn't let that keep happening. But the bodies keep appearing. Green Boots, Sleeping Beauty, Hannelore Schmatz, and dozens of others whose names we don't know, who died alone, who were left behind, who became landmarks for the next generation of climbers. Mount Everest is 29,032 feet tall. It's the highest point on Earth, and it's the deadliest graveyard in the world, a place where survival is random, where morality collapses, where human life is reduced to a simple calculation, summit or save, and most people choose the summit, because in the end, Everest doesn't care about your reasons for climbing. It doesn't care about your goals, your dreams, your family waiting at home. It only cares that you're willing to die for it, and if you are, it'll let you.